How did the Vikings survive those brutal winters without fireplaces? Well, let's talk about the cold weather secrets that kept them alive. They lived through months of darkness, bone-cracking cold and icy winds, sometimes without a single fireplace in the room. And they didn't freeze. That's not a myth. It's one of the most misunderstood survival stories in Viking history. Long before central heating, long before insulated walls or double-glazed windows, Viking families stayed alive through winters that regularly dropped well below freezing. Not just warriors, children, elders, entire households, and in many cases they did it without relying on a constant fire. Here's the interesting part. Fire was helpful, but it was never the main defense. The real secret was smarter, quieter, and brutally practical. Vikings versus the cold. Viking winters were no joke. Scandinavia, in the early medieval period, meant long, dark seasons, with heavy snow, frozen ground, and relentless wind. Wood was precious. Smoke was dangerous. And keeping a fire burning all night inside an enclosed space could kill you faster than the cold itself. So Vikings designed their entire way of living around conserving heat rather than producing it. Their survival started with architecture. Viking longhouses were built low and tight to the ground, reducing exposure to wind. Thick turf walls, sometimes over a metre deep, were packed with earth, grass and stone. These walls weren't decorative, they were thermal batteries. Once warmed by body heat, cooking, or daylight, they held that warmth for hours. The roof mattered just as much. Layers of birch bark and turf trapped heat inside while shedding rain and snow. No chimneys, no open fireplaces in many homes. Smoke escaped through small roof openings, but heat stayed low, right where people lived. The power of body heat, well, it was absolutely vital. Vikings relied on the warmth generated by their own bodies and those of their families, even their animals, to survive those brutal winters. Every bit of heat counted, and their homes were designed to make the most of it. Now, this is where things get clever. Vikings relied heavily on shared warmth. Entire families slept in the same space, often on raised wooden platforms. Sometimes livestock, goats, sheep, even cows, were housed in the same building during winter. Not out of kindness, out of physics. Animals generate heat, a lot of it. That warmth rose slowly through the structure, adding to the overall temperature without burning a single log. Combined with human body heat, the interior of a longhouse could stay survivable even during brutal cold snaps. This wasn't accidental. Archaeological evidence shows deliberate layouts separating animals just enough to manage hygiene, while still benefiting from their warmth. Survival wasn't about comfort. It was about staying alive until spring. Clothing was their first line of defense. Viking clothing did more than just cover skin. It functioned, really, as portable shelter. Wool was king, absolutely essential. Not cotton, and certainly not linen in winter. Wool retains heat even when it's damp, and it breathes just enough to prevent that dangerous moisture build-up. Layers really mattered. There was an inner tunic and then a heavier outer garment. Cloaks were pinned tightly to block the wind. Trousers were wrapped at the calf. Everything was designed to trap warm air close to the body. Fur wasn't a luxury at all. It was, in fact, insurance. Fur-lined cloaks, hats and mittens protected extremities where frostbite kills first. Vikings, well, they understood this through experience, not theory. And they repaired clothing constantly. A torn seam in winter wasn't just inconvenient, it was deadly. Beds for Vikings were heat traps, not pieces of furniture for comfort or show. Forget soft mattresses. Viking beds were survival tools. Raised platforms kept sleepers off the frozen ground. Bedding was layered with straw, animal skins, and thick wool blankets. And here's a detail most people miss. Vikings often slept wearing their clothes. Not because they lacked comfort, but because removing layers meant losing stored heat. The bed trapped warmth. The body generated it. The blanket sealed it in. Some households even used wooden bed enclosures or heavy curtains to reduce heat loss. This was insulation by design, centuries before the concept had a name. Food was, thermal fuel. Cold kills faster when the body runs out of energy. Vikings ate with winter in mind. High-fat foods weren't indulgent, they were essential. Dried fish, preserved meat, butter, cheese and stews, rich with animal fat, provided long-lasting energy. Fat burns slower than carbohydrates, producing sustained warmth from the inside. Hot meals mattered, even without fireplaces. Cooking fires were used carefully and efficiently. Once food was prepared, embers were often covered or extinguished to prevent smoke build-up. The heat from digestion did the rest. This is survival biology in action. Vikings didn't talk about calories, they lived by them. Fire was controlled, not constant. Despite the myth, Vikings did use fire, but sparingly. Open hearths were often central, low, and carefully managed. Fires were lit when needed, not burned endlessly. Why? Because oxygen mattered. Smoke inhalation was a real threat. Carbon monoxide was invisible and lethal. A fire that burned all night could kill everyone asleep inside. So, instead of relying on flames, Vikings relied on structure, materials, and routine. Fire warmed the space temporarily. The house held the heat. Then the fire died down. Daily movement kept them alive. Staying still in cold weather is dangerous. Vikings understood this instinctively. Daily chores weren't optional. They were life-saving. Chopping wood, repairing nets, feeding animals, processing food. Even during the coldest months, movement kept blood flowing and muscles generating heat. Inactivity meant freezing faster. Children worked. Elders worked within their limits. Everyone contributed, because everyone's warmth mattered. Psychological survival mattered too. Here's a quieter truth. Darkness and cold crush morale. Vikings fought that too. Storytelling, music and shared meals weren't just cultural traditions, they were psychological insulation. Keeping spirits up reduced stress, preserved cooperation, and helped people endure months of confinement. Survival isn't just physical. Vikings knew that long before modern science put a name to it. Why this still matters? Well, that's the question, isn't it? These weren't primitive tricks. They were systems, integrated solutions designed for a world without modern technology. And, they worked. Many of these principles still apply today. Insulation beats heat production. Layering beats exposure. Shared warmth saves energy. Smart design outlasts brute force. Vikings didn't survive winter by fighting it. They adapted to it. That's the lesson most people miss. Now, just a few final thoughts to wrap things up. So, the next time someone says Vikings survived because they had roaring fires in every home, remember this. Fire was optional. Knowledge wasn't. They engineered warmth into their homes, their clothing, their diet, and their routines. Quietly, efficiently, and with zero margin for error. If you enjoy uncovering real survival knowledge from before modern technology rewrote the rules, you're in the right place. Like this video if it surprised you. Share it with someone who loves forgotten history. And subscribe to Before Modern Times for more true stories of how humans survived the impossible, long before electricity ever showed up. Because, well, the past still has a lot to teach us.